Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with a hurricane outlook and discussion recorded on June 21st, 2023, recorded on 1 p.m. Eastern Time. In today's video, we're covering Tropical Storm Bret as it approaches the Lesser Antilles. We've got new tropical storm warnings that have been issued, and we're taking a look at two other systems that could potentially form behind that. So let's go ahead and jump straight into everything. Taking a look here at Tropical Storm Bret this afternoon, we notice how the storm has become a lot better defined since yesterday. Now, first of all, in the very early morning hours, the convective burst that was initially with the storm weakened, we've since gotten a new convective burst that has developed over top of the low-level circulation. But we do notice that the storm structure is still overall disheveled. There is still some upper-level outflow, and the upper level pattern isn't the issue. It's really this mid-level shear tilting the vortex onto its side. And so as a result of that, most of the thunderstorm activity today is actually on the eastern and northeastern side of the circulation. And so this is still producing some thunderstorms near the center of circulation itself, but most of the convection is off towards the north and east. And subsequently, the strongest winds are also going to be located towards the north and east as well. If we take a look here at the latest reconnaissance mission that is flying into Tropical Storm Bret as we currently speak, maximum flight level winds have been noted here at around 55 knots or so, far away from the surface circulation and also relatively close in as well. And we notice here that the recent plane has also found an extrapolated pressure of roughly about 1,000 millibars, and we notice that the SFMR winds here of roughly 50 knots, which is supporting the initial intensity of 50 knots. Now, the interesting thing to note is the surface circulation here is somewhere roughly in this area, and the recon plane does confirm that the recent convective burst is actually over top of our low-level circulation. And so if this were to continue to be the trend today, where consistent thunderstorms develop nearer to this low-level circulation, and it's able to maintain themselves and not just collapse, that will help to intensify the storm at least to a gradual degree as it approaches Barbados and the Lesser Antilles. So here's the 11 a.m. advisory on Tropical Storm Bret. The current intensity is 60 miles per hour with a pressure of around 1,001 millibars, moving to the west at 14 miles per hour. We do now have a tropical storm warning that is in effect for portions of St. Lucia, and we also have a tropical storm watch for Martinique, Dominica, and Barbados as well. The storm is expected to continue moving off towards the west throughout the next day or so, moving into the Caribbean by Friday morning, and then this system is expected to rapidly weaken and degenerate into an open tropical wave here on Saturday morning, with the last forecast point being at 8 a.m. Saturday with a 45 mile per hour tropical storm here located in the eastern part of the Caribbean. So this storm is expected to weaken as it moves through the Caribbean, and we're going to talk about why here right now. So we're looking here at the 200 millibar wind pattern, basically the upper level wind that is going to be governing the storm's intensity to a large part over the next several days. The upper level environment isn't all that unfavorable right now, fairly healthy upper level outflow, and that's not the problem with our storm. It's actually the mid-level shear in this area where the trade winds are relatively high at 15 to 20 knots, while you're dealing with the upper level winds being about 5 to 10 knots. So there is that difference there that's causing there to be shear in the middle part of the atmosphere. So as we progress forward over the next day or two, the storm still has a period where it could theoretically intensify to near 65 or 70 miles per hour. The intensity is pretty much, it's not going to be exact, and the storm may be near hurricane intensity as it approaches the island chain. Again, mainly looking at St. Lucia, Dominica, and Barbados, and also Martinique to that extent as well, for where this storm could roughly be, the center position. Effects are going to be felt well away, especially on the northern side of the circulation. But the storm is expected to cross then into the Caribbean, where we notice after the next about 48 hours or 2 days from now, shear begins to increase not only from an upper level ridge over the western Caribbean, but this trough that moves into the Caribbean as well, resulting in a lot of westerly shear over top of this system, which is going to then tilt the vortex over onto its side basically, and the storm won't be able to generate thunderstorms over its center. And without thunderstorms over the center to continue that latent heat release, you don't really have a heat engine, which is what a tropical cyclone virtually is. And without that engine, the storm falls apart. So this storm, by all means, is likely going to fall apart. As you can see, the storm gets really just hit by that shear. Now, the storm will emerge in the next couple of days into a lighter shear environment beyond about the next about 4 to 5 days. You can see here that the shear is relatively light at this time frame. I don't know if we can get a sounding. We'll see. I hope we can here. We can. Thank you. Okay. So what we're looking at here is the upper level environment near to the storm within about the next 5 days or so. Now, by this point, the upper level environment isn't particularly unfavorable, and the low level trades are only roughly about 15 knots here, especially in the mid levels, with about 10 knots there down to low levels. So this would be a semi-favorable environment for a storm to regather itself. However, that's only if there's a vortex that is able to really survive in this atmosphere. If not, then there is going to be nothing to build off of, and so we're likely just to see this dissipate. And that's what most of the models kind of agree with, is a storm dissipating out there in the Caribbean with a storm forming then in the eastern Pacific and kind of cutting off this storm from being able to reorganize out here, as the upper level flow is still somewhat very unfavorable for the storm. So overall, the track forecast remains relatively unchanged from previous. The center of circulation is likely to pass just a little bit north of Barbados, generally heading towards St. Lucia, and then it will continue into the Caribbean, where beyond that point, the models begin to diverge at least a little bit. Models like the H-Wharf, which has always been the furthest right outlier, take this on a track generally to the north of Jamaica, while most of the other models have come into agreement that the storm will run into Central America within the next couple of days. And that's why, generally speaking, I'm not really expecting much in the way of reinvigoration of the system once it gets into a little bit of a lighter shear environment out here in the western part of the basin, because this is generally expected to move into Central America. And that's where most of the track density forecast has this going into. There's a fairly high confidence that this is, or at least a moderate confidence rather, that this is going to move into Central America and just dissipate out there. So we will have to just monitor just to see how this is, going to evolve. Some of the recent runs of the ECMWF have, tried to at least make it somewhat interesting, but that's getting in the long range. I think this is honestly just going to go plow into Central America and die. And I want to also reiterate, this is not going to be a storm past the next 4 days. Weakening is extremely likely due to the unfavorable environment, so this is not really a substantial threat for Central America right now. So really the biggest threat is going to be for places within that tropical storm watch warning map, and we'll look at the impacts right now. So here we are, we're looking at the GFS forecast of the maximum wind gusts in the area, and we're just going to continue to kind of roll this forward as we progress throughout the next several days. The storm, it's hard to see where the islands are, but they're roughly right about here on my cursor, so just kind of bear with me here. So this begins to move into the islands over the next several days, again, generally staying to the north of Barbados. It's looking like, according to the GFS, that we're going to see some wind gusts up here closer towards 60 miles per hour through places like St. Lucia, Martinique, and Dominica, and then we could even see some 40 to maybe 45 mile per hour winds up there towards Dominica and portions of Dominica and Guadeloupe, as we progress throughout the next couple of days. So again, generally speaking, the places that I am most concerned about right now are going to be northern Barbados, St. Lucia, Martinique, Dominica, and Guadeloupe, with a lesser threat for Antigua and Barbuda and St. Kitts and places over towards St. Martin. So Again, generally speaking, that's kind of what we're looking at, with winds that, of course, are lighter the further north you get from the storm. And then this moves down into the Caribbean, where there might even still be some gustier winds, especially across portions of southern Puerto Rico, in the southern part towards St. Kitts there and Nevis, and also still in Guadeloupe. And this would be on the 23rd, so here in just a few days on Friday. So that's kind of what we're looking at as the storm begins to move through, and then it should clear the area by late Friday going into early Sunday morning, or Saturday morning rather. Now, beyond this system, we are also tracking Invest Area 93L, currently located to the south and east of Tropical Storm Bret this morning, or this afternoon rather. So the storm today actually looks a little bit better organized. There is a semi-decent banding structure that is evident here in the visible satellite imagery. And there is some hints here. It's a little bit hard to see because the quality of this, because it's a full image here, it's not going to be as good, compared to the mesosectors. But generally speaking, there is some hints of a low-level circulation that has actually begun to form in this area closer towards where the deepest convection is. Although there is not convection currently present over the center, but it does look like at the very end there is a little bit of a convective burst that tries to develop and maybe trying to wrap around. So we'll see. This is probably not too far off from classification, probably another 24 to 36 hours, and this too could become a tropical depression or storm. But in the long range, the storm is going to be generally moving westward over the next couple of days, and we can put on the forecast models real briefly. The storm is expected to kind of curve off towards the north and west during the next several days. However, it is still a little bit unsure whether or not the northern part of the island chain is going to be impacted by 93L. If it gets a little bit further west, we could see a storm that just kind of makes a glancing kind of swipe on the islands and continues off towards the north and east, or north and west, and moves into the Caribbean, or not the Caribbean, but moves into the southwestern Atlantic over the next several days. And this system, again, if anything, would pose maybe a little bit of a heavy rain and gusty wind threat. But overall, I'm not too concerned with this system, and we're going to look at why right now. The upper level environment for 93L at the moment is still rather favorable for tropical cyclone formation. However, as we progress throughout the next several days, we notice the trough that is coming in here off the top left of your screen. This is the same trough that is going to be shearing Bret over the next few days. And the storm eventually, as it begins to turn northward as a response to this trough digging in, it's going to encounter these westerly winds and begin to shear off any thunderstorms that try to develop near the low-level circulation. So while we may have a depression or weak tropical storm that forms in this area during the next several days, it's unlikely to get rather strong as it moves northward, at least for several days, because this constant westerly and northwesterly shear from this trough right here digging in to the Caribbean and the Atlantic. So this is likely to keep our storm at bay in terms of intensity for several days. If we look here at the HWRF forecast, this is a somewhat reasonable depiction. If we go back to 0Z, it's a somewhat reasonable depiction where the storm could become a strong tropical storm, maybe even a hurricane, at least for several days, but then it weakens on approach because of the trough to the north. We'll have to see exactly how this plays out. This is just one solution, but it does kind of give us an idea of what we could look at, but it's still a little too early to determine what threats may it pose for the islands at this point. And finally, we are also tracking a strong tropical wave that has merged off the coast of Africa today. This large piece of energy is going to be moving westward over the next several days. Models are picking up on some development with this wave, although unlike the last two waves with Bret and 93L, there's going to be some more dry air problems that could wrap around and choke off the convection. Right now it's doing quite well, but we'll have to see if this persists over the next several days. If it does so, this might be a system to monitor as this too moves westward across the tropical Atlantic. With that being said, I do hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. Of course, I'll be back this evening. I am Michael O'Malley. God bless. Take care. I'll talk to you guys again some more this evening.